Welcome to this new section, and in this section you're going to learn how to build a real-world program that allows the user to store information about books. So I have already built that program and I'll show you step by step how you can do the same. I have the program here and it's an executable file. So apart from learning how to build the .py program, you'll also learn how to build executable files that run on Windows and .app file that run on Mac. So you can basically give your program to anyone and they don't need to have Python installed in their computer. So I call the program bookstore. And this was built mainly with Tkinter, which is a graphical user interface library, and the SQLite 3 library, which is a library to interact with SQLite database. So what we got here are 4 entries where you can enter a new book record. So let's say you got a new book in your store and you want to add it in your database. And here you can see all the books that have been added to the program. You can add a new book, let's say Pythons for the title, Ardit, quickly, and 1918. You have the ISBN number, which is unique identification number for books. It's quite long, let's say like that, and you add entry and then you view all again and you'll see that the new entry was added to the database. So every record that you see here is actually stored in a table inside this Lite1 database. Then you have some other buttons here, so if you want you can actually search for entry for a record. Search entry and then it will display the entry that you search. When you click on the entry, you get all the fields displayed in each of the text box here. So view all again, and you can also update and delete records. And finally you can close the window. So it's not a great user interface. I'm not a great user interface designer, but you will learn a lot by building this program. So it's quite a long one, but it will pay off. So let's kick it off. Hi there, and in this lecture what we're going to do is start to build our bookstore program. Specifically, we're going to work on the graphical user interface, because you know this program has 2 parts, so to say. So it has a backend and it has a frontend. The backend is the SQLite 3 database code, so the code that interacts with the database, and the front end is the code of the Tkinter library, so the code that builds up all these buttons, these entries, this text, and this list box, and this scroll bar. So normally you'd have to choose whether you want to work on the backend code first or you want to start building the front end code. But first of all though, the very first thing you want to do is actually to start defining some requirements. So you want to say what your program will do. So let's say you want your program to show a list of the current records. So when you press view all, you see the list of records here. And then you want your program to search a current entry, and then you want to add entry and update and select data. And then you want the program to close the window. So basically these are our requirements, and now you can choose to start writing the backend. So you could write a function that selects all the data from the database, and then you could return those data as text, so you can just print them out just for now if you want to write the backend first, because you don't have the front end, you don't have the graphical user interface built yet. So you can just write functions of the backend and then print out the output. Or you can start writing the front end first, so you build this graphical user interface, but when you click those buttons nothing happens. So you just draw this thing with Python. And then once you have done that, you start building the backend, and then you connect all these widgets and all the commands of these buttons with your backend functions. So it's a matter of preference whether you choose to work with the backend or the front end first. In this course, in this section, we're going to build the front end first. So we're going to build a graphical user interface that will do nothing for a while until we connect it with the backend. Alright then, I would like to first remove this vertical bar here because I'm going to draw the graphical user interface here. So I'm going to make a sketch for you to see and to have the sketch in here all the time. So to remove this bar, if you're curious, you can just go to settings. Then there is a package that actually shows that bar. That's called wrap guide, and you want to display, so this displays a line of the 80th character in the editor, and that may help you, if you want, may help you to keep a particular pattern. So you don't want to have more than 80 characters in your code, so that bar helps you keep that rule. Anyway, we don't want that, so I just removed it. And I'm just going to write a few notes inside the doc string. So you know that a doc string is like a comment line. So if you put anything inside these triple quotes, this is not read as code by Python, but it's just like a documentation string. So just for humans to read. So let's say I want a program that stores this book information. So title and author, year and ISBN, so the identification number for books. And the user can view all records, they can search an entry and add an entry, update an entry, delete, and they can close the program if they want. Close. Great. So if you start thinking about that, now you'd want to have a graphical user interface that has all these buttons, so that the user can do these actions through some buttons. And then you think about how they can view records, and you know that Tkinter has the list box widget that allows you to display text as a list, so line by line. And then you want the user to search an entry, add an entry, update entry. So you need some entry widgets. And then of course you'd want some labels that can tell what each entry is about. So that would be a label widget. And you may also want a scroll bar, so that your list is scrollable. So if there are many records, the user can scroll through them and they can see the records under the list. And so we've got a sketch. This of course requires some fantasy and maybe some experience with user interface designing, but it's very important that you have a sketch. So I'm going to keep this sketch on the screen while I code the program. Normally in real life you'd want to have a drawing, maybe on a real paper or just on a digital screen, but it's important to have it. And now that we have it, let's start building it in the next lecture. Great, so now we have a sketch of our graphical user interface, and that should make things easier. So now you can just go ahead and code your graphical user interface in Python using the Tkinter features. So Tkinter is a library that we'll be using to make this interface. And I suppose you already know Tkinter because I explained that in one of the previous sections. So if you don't know Tkinter, please go back 2 sections before this, and then you'll be able to understand what I'm talking about here. So I'll keep the sketch on the right. And now you know that to make a graphical user interface with Tkinter, you can either use the pack methods to pack your widgets or the grid method. We'll be using the grid method, so it could be a good idea to actually make a grid on your sketch. So that when you create your widgets, let's say you create a button, you'd want to pass the number of the row and the number of the column. So having a grid like this will make things easier. Alright. And I'll just like to delete this doc string. We don't need it, and it saves me space so that you can see more a cleaner workspace here. Alright, from Tkinter import everything. So I'm not explaining the code now because you already know these things. If there is something new, I'll go through it. Window equals to tk, so the tk method. that creates a window object, and then you want to apply the main loop method, which is basically a way to wrap up all the widgets that you will enter in this space now. Alright, so we have 4 labels here. So we have a label title and author, year, and ISBN. So I'm just going to create 4 labels, or 4 label objects. So I'll name my objects, my variables, from L1 to L4, and we use the label object, label method for that. Window is the parent window, and text would be title. So Control Enter, you can go to the next line, no matter where you are in the previous line. So you don't have to just switch, go to here and then press Enter. You just press Control Enter and you go to the next line. L1, you apply the grid method. So the first label is on row 0, and column 0 as well. Then you can just copy this and paste it 3 more times. So that would be L2, L3, and L4. And you'd also want to change the text of your label, year, and ISBN. Author would be column 2, as you see from the sketch. So 0, 2, then we have the year would be 1, 0, and then 1, 2 for the last label. So let's see what we have. I'd just like to call my script. Alright, looks promising. Now let's add the entries. So these were static widgets. Now we need to add some entries. So A1 would be entry, and an entry gets the window as the first parameter, just like any other widget does, and also a text variable parameter. This text variable parameter, this expects as an argument the value that the user will enter in the entry widget. That is a spatial data type. So you first need to actually create a data type here, an object with of that data type. So let's call it, we are creating the entry for the title, say title text equal to string var. So this is the function that creates this spatial object, and that would be equal to that title text. So that's it. And you also need to grid this entry widget. So grid, and the first widget, so the title widget, corresponds with row 0 and column 1. So that's it. I can quickly multiply this here, and author text, year text, and ISBN text. You also need to change the numbers of your variables, just like that. And of course you need to pass that these user entries in here. So this should be n and these 2. Alright, and lastly you want to specify the rows and the columns for these entries too. So E2 would be 0, 3, and then we have the year text widget 1, 1. Alright, and the last entry 1, 3. Alright, let's check it out. Yeah, looks good. Great. And now it's the turn of the list box. So let's call it list 1, why not? and that would be equal to list box window. And then you would want to specify the height of your list box and the width as well. So I thought about putting 6 and 35. It would be good height and width. You can taste different heights and width and see what comes better. And then I'd like to grid this. So grid, and so this would start at row number 2 and column 0. However, if we leave it like this, things will not go as we expect. Actually, we can try this. And as you can see, the list box occupied only the first cell. So the first cell of the first column on row 0, 1, 2. So row 2, column 0. What we want instead is to span this list box on the other columns as well and on the other rows, because we'll have buttons here later, so we'll want to span that. And you can see the sketch here. So we can add a row span parameter, and that would be equal to 6, and column span as well, so that would be 2. Alright, so that would be a list box. However, we also need to actually add a scroll bar there, so that the lists can be scrolled when there are lots of data in the list, lots of records. To attach a scroll bar to the list, the logic here works like this. You create your scroll bar, and then you tell your scroll bar about the list that the scroll bar has to scroll. And then you tell your list as well who its scroll bar is. So let's first create the scroll bar, an independent scroll bar. So let's say sb1 scroll bar method, and that is attached to the window. And then you apply the grid method. So the scroll bar would be on row 1, column 3. And once you created these two objects, you want to apply a configure method to the list box and a configure method to the scroll bar object. And these configure methods get arguments. So this would be scroll command equals to sb1.set. That's it. So meaning that the vertical scroll bar along the y-axis will be set to this scroll bar. And then you go to the scroll bar method. Sorry, this has to be configure. Then you pass command equals to list1.yView. So that should work. You are passing a command parameter here, so meaning that when you scroll the bar, the view, the vertical view of the list will change. So let's see how this goes. And seems like I've messed up something here. I have put the position of the scroll bar on row 1, I guess, and column 3, yeah. So the scroll bar should be actually row 2, column 2. Let's check that again. Yep, seems to be working. Though it doesn't look very centered because we need to span it through the same rows as we have spanned the list box here. So we need to add here a row span parameter and set it to 6. And now the scroll bar looks centered. Alright, so now what we've left is to add these button widgets just here. Great. So we have 6 buttons. Let's start with the first one. We have the button method, window and text, so buttons have text. View all is the first one. And then I thought of putting a width of 12. So b1 grid, that would be row 2, column 3. And we have 5 more buttons. So I'll paste this. 6, I think. So b2, b3, 4, and 6. Of course, these buttons don't have a command parameter now, because later we will add here a command parameter, and that will decide what the buttons will do. But for now, that is just fine. So these buttons will be aligned in column 3, all of them, and everyone has a different row value. And 6. Great, so let's see what we got. And boom! I forgot to put a row number for the close button. So 7. And now it looks better. So this was how to build a graphical user interface. Of course, these buttons don't do anything for now. So in the next lecture, I'll show you how to attach actions to this graphical user interface. So we will work on the backend, and we'll be using SQLite 3 for interacting with the database and fetching those data in this graphical user interface. So I hope my routines and my practices will help you to build graphical user interfaces with easy. And I'll see you in the next lecture. Hey, welcome to this new lecture, and here we are continuing to build our bookstore program that stores and retrieves book records from a database. So far, as you know, we have built the graphical user interface with Tkinter. So this is our script. So basically we have the front end of our program. And now, so this is our graphical user interface. And basically what we need to do now is to attach some functions to all these buttons. So let's say, for example, when we press the view all button, a function will be triggered that selects data from an SQLite database and then gets those data and put them on this list box here. So that means we need to create a database, an SQLite database with SQLite 3. We also need to create a table first. So we could do this in this script, but I prefer to actually create another script and then import that script in here. So import, let's call the new script Backend. So we need to create a backend.py script. Alright, and I'd also want to change the name of this, of my front-end script, so that we keep the same pattern. So let's say front end. Alright, so we are in the front-end script now, and here we are in the back-end script. So what that means is, let's say you create a view function, so that selects data from the database, and you create that function here, and then you go to the view all button, and then you would add a command parameter here, and that would be equal. So let's say command, just to give you an idea, command equals to backend and the name of the function. So something like that. Alright, hope this makes sense. However, for now it would be great if we forget about this script. So we need to keep in mind the graphical user interface, but it's good not to interact with these widgets for now. So what we do instead is print out the outputs of our functions, the functions that we'll build, as strings in the command line here. So we'll not throw those data in the list box, but in the terminal here. Alright, let's start coding. Import SQLite 3. That's the first thing you want to do. And I'll keep an image of the graphical user interface here so that it's easy for you to refer to it. So we need to create a view function, but before that I would like to create a database, so a connection to a database. and I would like to put that inside the function. So let's say function connect, and we have a connection object. So that would be a SQLi3 connect, and let's call the database books.db. Alright, so we establish a connection to the database. Then we define a cursor object, like that. And next we need to execute an SQL statement. So cursor object execute, and inside double quotes we input the SQL statement. So we have a database, and we also need a table in the database where to store our book information. Now think about that. When you give this program to a user, they will execute the program, and every time they execute the program, your script has to check if there is an existing table in the books database. So if there is a table, you say don't create the table. If there is not a table, you'd want to create the table. So create table if not exists, and let's call table book just to differentiate it from the database name. And then you'd want to pass some parameters. The first parameter I'd like to pass is the ID. So don't confuse this with the ISBN number, the book identification. This is just a number that will start from 0 and it will auto increment by 1, so that we have control of how many records we have in the database. So it's a good idea to have this ID here, and that would be an integer, and you need to set it to primary key. So that's a mandatory column in your table. Then you have title as text, author as text, year as integer, and ISBN, that's an integer as well. Alright, that's it. You want to commit your changes and then close the connection. Alright, so we created a connect function. Later when we will run this script, so the frontend script, and then you import backend, this script, the script of the backend, so the code of the backend will be read by Python. But if you haven't called this function, this code will not be executed. So what you want to do instead is have this function executed anytime you execute this function. So you execute frontend, and this imports backend, so it executes all the code, and this line here is executed, so the function will run anytime you run frontend. Alright, I hope that makes sense. Or let me quickly explain that better. So we have an a.py script and we have a b.py script, and in the a.py script we import the b script, and what we have in the b script is a function foo that prints out something on the screen. Hey, and save this and save this as well. So when you execute a.py, nothing happens for now because you have just defined your script. But if you call this script here, alright, foo, save, and execute a again, this time you will get the output of the function. So that's the idea. Thanks. And back to our real world script. Alright, now we have the connect function. Let's start by creating an insert function, a function that will insert some data in the database. So I'm starting with the insert function because that's an easier function than the other one. So I'd like to start from the easy things first. Def insert. So that's how I call my function, and think about that. You have 4 entries there. So you expect from the user to enter a title, author, and year, and an ISBN number. So you want to pass 4 parameters here. then of course you need to connect to the database. Because this function here, it will just connect to the database temporarily, and it will check that if there is a table, and it will close the connection. So you have a closed connection here. When you press the insert button, when you press the add entry button, you need to create a new connection to the database. And let me go ahead and get these two lines as well, because we need them too. Alright, and here is where we execute our specific SQL statement inside quotes. So what the add entry button will do is insert into book, so the table book, values. And here is a trick now. We have an ID here, so this is an auto increment value, so we don't have to pass that manually. And what we can do instead is pass a null value here, and Python understands that, and it will create the ID automatically. And then we have 4 question marks, one for each of our values. And then you need to pass your parameters as a second parameter of the execute function. So as a tuple here, title, author, year, and ISBN. Alright, let me write another function, and then we execute the script to try it and see how it is going. So def, let's say the view function. So this will fetch all the rows of the table. So we copy this and put them here. So we connect to the database, create a cursor object, and then we execute an SQL statement. And then, because this will be a select statement, so we will not perform any changes to the database, so we don't need a commit method here. And this is actually quite simple. Select all from book. So you actually need to return your selection as a tuple, and then you grab that selection and you put that in the list box. So you want the view function to return a tuple. So let's say rows equals to cur fetch all, and then you can close the connection, but your data will remain stored in the rows variable, so you can just return rows here. Alright. So let's try out the script now. And the way to try it out would be to use a print statement. So we would want to call insert, and then we would enter some data manually. So in the real program, this insert function will be executed somewhere in the add entry button. But for now we need to keep things simple and reach our objective step by step. So insert, let's pass some values here, title, let's say the C, and then author John, tablet, right, and year is an integer, so you just need to pass a number, and ISBN also is an integer, so no need to put them inside quotes. And then you would also want to print out the output of the view function. Great. So let's see how this goes. That would be the backend script. Great. So the record was inserted into the database and it was printed out from the view function. If you execute the script again, you'll get 2 records because the insert function was executed 2 times. Alright, seems to be going well. So what else do we have? We have a search function. And we would implement an OR search. So what that means is that the user will enter a title or an author name, or the year or the ISBN number. Or he may choose to enter all of them at the same time. But if, let's say, he enters the year only, he'll get all the rows corresponding to that year. So here we need to pass 4 parameters as well. SBN. Alright. And then we need these lines of code. So connect to the database, cursor object, and then execute. So let's stay here for a while. We want to select all from book where title is equal to something, or author is equal to something, or year equals to something, or ISBN. And then the second parameter would be the tuple of the arguments: title, for, year, ISBN. And then we need to fetch all the rows that will be returned from this query and store them in this rows variable. Close the connection and again return rows. Alright. One problem here though that we may encounter is that the user may want to pass, let's say, the author name only to the entries, so this function will get only the arguments for the author parameter. These other parameters will remain without a value, and then you'll get an error because your function is designed to have 4 parameters. In that case, you'd want to pass some empty strings as default values. Alright. And these 2. So now if the user passes an author name, let's say John Smith, this SQL statement will search for an empty title, or for the author name John Smith, or for an empty year and ISBN and so on, and it will return all the rows with John Smith as author name. Alright, so let's save this and try it out. So we have connect, insert, print view. Let's say the earth, I'm inserting another record here, John Smith. Alright, and then let's say print search, and you want to pass some arguments. For example, author equals to John Smith. Alright, without a quote here, and let's see how this goes. So we got here this list of rows from the view function, because we also have the view function here, and then the search function returned this row for us. So the row with ID 3 and with John Smith as author. So that is working well. Let's go ahead and build a delete function now. So let's think about how the user wants to delete a record. So most probably they would want to see some records in the list box, and then they would want to select one of the records, let's say the record for ID 3, the earth, John Smith, etc. So they would select that and then would press the delete button. So that means we would want to first grab the list selection, so the selection from the list box. We would grab that as a tuple, but we'll think about that later. So we'll grab that as a tuple, and then that tuple has a unique identification number, so the ID. So we would want to refer to that ID and then go to our database table and delete the row with that ID. So hope that is not very confusing. And in the delete function, so we would expect the ID of the tuple that the user will select. And then we would want to have this code and start from there. So connect to the database, cursor object, execute a statement. Alright, let's see how this goes. So we want to delete from book where ID is equal to something. Great. And then that something is the ID parameter. So the argument of this parameter here. And this is the column name. So don't confuse this with this column name function parameter. And don't forget the comma here. And yeah, that's basically it. Let's save this script now and let's execute it. We insert some data there. Let's say the sun this time. And so we'd have the sea again, the earth, and the sun. So I'd like to delete the earth. And I would want to put them in here, delete. So earth has an ID of 3, so we'd want to pass 3 here. And then we would view all the current records once we have deleted them. Alright, so here are our records, and the earth has disappeared. So it's working great. Again, as I said, this ID will be extracted from the tuple, so the tuple will have the ID as a first item, and so basically we'll get from tuple get the item with index 0, and we'll pass that first item to this delete function. Great. The last function would be update. And again, how would we want to update records? So how would the user want to update a record? Well, again, they may expect to select a row from the list box, from the Tkinter list box, and the values of that row would display in the entry widgets. And then from there, the user may want to change one of those cells, of those entries, and press the update button. So again, we will get a selection from the list box, and then we would refer to the ID. So ID here as the first parameter, but we would also want to get the new values that the user would want from those entries. So let's say the user wanted to change the title from the sun to the moon, let's say, and you'd get that title. So the title will be in the entry box and pass it here. Same for author, year, and ISBN. Alright, and then you'd want to update your table, so update table where the ID is equal to this. Update table with this new values where ID is equal to this. First of all though, we need to get all these rows. Alright, so update book, and you say set, so the keyword set title equal to question mark, same year question mark, and ISBN equals to question mark. So update book and set these values where ID is equal to another question mark. So then we pass the tuple here. So ID, title, author, and ISBN. So it's looking good. We commit the changes and we close the connection. And let's see how this goes. So currently we have these rows in the table, the sea again, the sun. Yeah, these 3 rows. And let's update the sun. So I'd want to comment this out first and also delete. So let's focus on the update function and update. So you would want to pass the ID of the row so that you want to update, and then you want to pass the values in the correct order. So what you want for the new title, let's say the moon. And then in the real interface, in the graphical user interface, if the user wants to change only the title, he will leave the other values as they are, so these values will be replaced to the existing values. So John Smith and year 1918, the ISBN number, But in this case, we are just in a test mode, so we can pass these values. Smooth, alright. And a number. So let's see how this goes now. And it seems it didn't work. The sun is still there. So let's see what we got here. Update title author year ISBN, where ID is. So the ID should be at the end of the tuple here. Because you know we put them in the correct order that we have set here. So let's try this out again. Now it's working. So the ID 4 was replaced to the moon, John Smooth, and the other values. Great, so I think we have the backend script ready. And what we need now is attach all these functions to our buttons. So we still have work to do, and we'll do that in the next lecture. Hey, welcome again, and this is the final push that we will give to our application. So by the end of this lecture you'll have a fully working program that can store and retrieve book records in an SQLite database. So as you know, we have two scripts. We have frontend.py and we have the backend.py script. We are completely done with the backend.py script. So we have built all of our functions that connect to the database, insert, view, search, and delete and update data. And now we need to go to the frontend script, because we need to tweak it a little bit so that the frontend script is able to fetch, to get data from the backend script, or more specifically is able to get the function outputs, which are basically tuples of data, and then insert those tuples of data in the list box. So basically the user presses a button and then these functions are triggered and the data are inserted to the list box. So let's start from the easiest things. And the first thing I would like to implement is to get the records in the list box when the user presses the View All button. First of all, as I mentioned before, you need to import the backend script in here so that you are later able to refer to your functions as something like backend.view, for example, for the database view function. Now, I have been mentioning that to attach a function to a button, you need to go to where you have defined that button, so to the button function, and then you add a command here. So command, and then here goes the function. Now if we just call the view function of the backend script, so if we do backend.view, all we are doing is just executing the view function, so we aren't inserting any data to the list box. So what we want to do is have another function and have that function grab the data from the view function and insert those data to the list box. For example, let's call that function view command. Just like that. Remember, you don't pass brackets here, because if you do, when you execute the script, this function here, if you do like this function will be executed when Python reads your script. But you don't want that. You want that when you press the button, when the user presses the button, this function is executed. So Tkinter knows that, and if you just pass this like this, Python Tkinter will execute it when the button is pressed. So view command, and now you need a view command function. So let's write our functions just here. Def view command. So think about the output now. The output we are getting is a tuple. So I'm going to execute the view function here, so print view, just to see what we have if you have forgotten it. So Python backend.py, and so we have a list of tuples, so tuples inside a list, and what we want to do now is to insert each of these tuples, so each of these database rows, as a new row inside the list. inside the list box. So what we can do is we can iterate through this tuple. So that would be for, let's say, a row in backend dot view. So this is actually this list here. So this is actually an object, a list object. And then list 1, I believe that's how our list box is called. So yeah, so it's a list 1. That's a variable holding our list box dot insert. And then the insert method gets 2 arguments. The first argument is the index where you want to insert your values. So you have a list box, and that list box has several places. So yeah, it has the first place, and then the second, third, and so on. So if you want to put it in the first place, you do enter 0. If you want to put it in the second, you would enter an index of 1 here, and so on. But think about that. We are iterating through these tuples. So we go to the first tuple, and then we would want to put it, and we would want to put this tuple as the first item of the list. And then we would want the second to be put as the second item, and so on. So in such cases, the insert method also has a special index that is called end. And then you pass the row. So what that means is that the new rows will be put at the end of the list box. So you have this row, and this is put the first one, and then this will be put at the end of the existing rows. So that ensures that every new row is inserted at the end of the list box. So I hope that is clear. And I would actually like to execute the script. So now we have the frontend .py, and I have made an error here. So actually I want to import backend here, like that. Execute again, and we got the interface. So let's see what view all has. Name backend is not defined in line 5. So back, yeah, of course it's not defined because I have a typo here. Backend. All right, let's try it again. Close it. Let's see. Great, so we got the rows displayed in the list box. But when you press it again and again and again and again, these rows will be appended to the existing ones. So we need to think about how we can actually have an empty list box when we press the button. That's actually very easy to do. We need to ensure here that when these lines are executed, the list box is already empty. So what we can do is list1 delete and 0 end ensures that you are deleting everything from the index of 0, from the row with index of 0 to the end, to the last row. So let's see how that goes. View all, and if you press view all again, you always get all the rows that you have in the database, in the table. Great. Let's now go ahead and define a similar function for the search entry button. So the button is this one here, search entry. And again, we want the user to enter at least 1 value in the entries, in the entry boxes, and then they press the search entry button, and then they expect the program to return the rows that contain the entry that the user input in the entry box. So again, you'd want to insert data in the list box. So again, you can just call the search function of the backend script in here, command. So you need a wrapper function. So let's say search command. Another good reason that you want to use these wrapper functions, so to say, is that in some cases, like this one here, you are passing some parameters to the function. So if you look at the backend, and the view function didn't have any parameters, but the search function has some parameters. So that means you're not allowed to put brackets here, so you have to use another function where you call your main backend search function with parameters actually, and that's what we're going to do now. So def search command, and again the search command, what we'll actually get as argument is a title that the user will input, an author name, and year, and ISBN number. Now the way we're going to get these parameters is from the entry widgets. So where's the entry? Here are the entry widgets, and you should remember that we have this string var object here. This variable that has the string var data type will be given as a value the text or the number that the user enters in the entry widget. So keep that in mind. Let's go ahead here, and the first thing you want to do is list1.delete. So you want to empty the list. Alright, and then you need to loop through the backend list output, because you know, in this case, let's execute this quickly. So the backend script. So we are searching for the author name John Smith, backend.py. Alright, we don't have any John Smith at the moment, so let's look for John Smith. So we got an empty list there. Save again, and you'll see that we got a list of tuples. So in this case we have only one tuple, but you get the idea. That means we need to iterate through for row again in backend dot search, and here you need to be careful. So the search function has parameters, and the first parameter will be title text. So the text that the user is inputting in the entry widget, in the text entry widget. However, we are not done, because the title text is actually a string var object, so it's not a plain string. And what we need to do is actually append a get method here, and this will output a string object. So if the user enters John Smith there in the widget, this will produce a simple John Smith string. So I hope that makes sense. Author text again, get method. Then we have year text.get, and lastly ISBN text.get. So for row in the list that the search function will output for us when it searches the database, we simply want to insert new values at the end of the list, just like that. I can see the syntax highlighting is not working here, so I probably have some sort of typo. Yeah, I'm missing a colon here. So now for and in were colored in purple. Okay, so let's try out the frontend script, and let's look for author John Smith. Well, obviously I press the view all button, so I got everything here. So you want to press search button. Alright, search, and it always shows John Smith. If you say view all, it shows everything. So it seems to be working. And next is add entry button. So when the user presses the add entry button, they expect that the data they have been typing in the 4 entry widgets, this data will be stored in somewhere. They don't know where, but they will be stored somewhere, and they will be able to retrieve them. So that means you need to call the insert function in here in the backend script. So this function will get these 4 arguments, so the values from the entry widgets, and it will post them in the book table. As easy as that. So first thing we might want to do is go to the add entry button. So here, and then add a wrapper function here. Add command, and then we create an add command function. And this is quite straightforward actually. You just say backend dot insert, and here you pass these values. So I'll just copy this and paste them here. So let's try this out. Let's try to add some entries. Let's say trees and grass. Let's say Ben Sand, year 1917, and just put a number there for the ISBN and add entry. So the entry has probably been added in the database, but we didn't see anything, and you can see it with a view all function probably. So if I press view all, we'll see trees and grass, but it would be good that when we add entry, this entry, the new entry is displayed here so that the user knows that the entry was successfully added to the database. So here is trees and grass. And so let's go ahead and do something that the entry is shown in the list box when the user presses add entry. And what we can do is we first need to ensure that the list is empty. So delete 0 to end and the list, and that gives us an empty list. Then we insert new values at the end of the list. So what values? Well, these ones. So the values that the user will enter, just like that. So let's see how this goes. Let's say lands, grasslands. Let's say Kirk Hammett and year 1910 and a number there. And this is not quite what we were expecting actually. And we got this because we are inserting here many values indeed. So we are telling Python to insert all this in a new value, this in a new one, and this as well, and so on and so forth. So the solution here is simple. Just put it as a single value, so as a tuple, and then run the program again. We have an error here, so we need one more bracket because this bracket here closes here. So just like that. Try it out again. Let's say Wonderland. Elena Gomes, 1944, and a number here. Add entry. And now we have the row in one single line. View all, and Wonderlands is there. Grasslands is also there. So let's move on. Okay, we have some more code to go. We have defined the view, the search, and the add buttons. So now we have the delete, the update, and the close button. And I'd like to continue with the delete button because the delete button is easier to implement than the update button. So let me call the interface again. And again, think about the user. What the user might expect is that they may want to delete one of the rows, let's say this row. So they expect to select this row and then they press the delete selected button, and this row will disappear from the database. And they may also want to, when they select a row, they may also want to see the data in these entries. And we will take care of that too, so we will fill these entries with the corresponding values when the user clicks one of the rows here. Alright, that makes sense, I believe. And now let's look at the delete function in the backend script. So what delete does is it expects for an ID, the ID of the row, and then this SQL statement then looks for this ID and deletes the entire row of the book table where the ID is equal to this given ID here. So what we need to do is, when the user selects one of the rows in the list box, we need to grab the ID of that row and then send that ID to the delete function of the backend script. And then the delete function takes care of the row. Oh, good. And again, in this case, we would also want to append some sort of delete command function to the here to the delete button. But in this case, I would actually like to do a bottom-up approach. So let's first think of how we're gonna get the row selected by the user. So let's think about that first. And you don't know probably, but there is a method called bind of the Tkinter library, and bind is used to bind a function to a widget event. So let me write that bind method so that you understand things better. So we are binding a method here to the list box widget. So it makes sense to write that method after we have defined the list widget. So we define the list widget here, and we configure it, and then list1 dot bind, and the bind method takes two arguments. So it takes the event type, and also it takes the function that you want to bind to the event type. The event type here is actually goes inside these characters, and it's called listbox select. And then you want to specify a function here that returns a list object with a selection. So something like this. Actually, we will expect a tuple in this case. A tuple with the ID, the title, the author, and the year, and the ISBN number. So let's call that function get selected row. Okay. And then we go ahead and define that function. Let's define it in the very beginning here. So def get selected row, and this function now, because we have binded to an event, to a widget event, this function gets a special parameter called event, and the event parameter holds the information about the type of the event. So Python knows that when you pass this to the bind method, it expects the function to have this event parameter. And then, so again, this function will return the tuple, the selected tuple. But first of all, the way this works is that we first need to get the index of the list from the list box. You know, the list may have, let's say, 10 rows, and the first row will have an index of 0, the second an index of 1, and so on, up to 9 if we have 10 rows. So to get the index of the selected row of the list box, we refer to the list box and then to the selection method of the list box. Alright, and I'd actually like to just make a temporary return of the index here so that you see what this object is and how it looks like. So let's hope this will work. It should work. Python Frontend, yep. And so view all. Actually, we should have printed out the index here. We are just returning it, so print index, and let's try this out again. So I expect to print out the index here. Yep. So this is the index of the selected row. So this is row 1, 0, with index 0, 1, 2, and so on. However, as you see, this is not a plain number. This is actually a tuple with one item. So what we need to do is a very simple trick, and we just grab the item with index 0 of the tuple, which is number 2 in this case, 0 in this case, and so on. And then we might try this again. View all, and now we get single numbers. Great. So we're very close, but not there yet, because we need to get the actual tuple with all the values of the row. And to get that, you need to apply another method called get. So let's say the selected tuple, so the actual tuple that we want, the actual row that we want, is equal to list1.get index. So you can read it like this. From the list box, get the tuple with index x. And then we can try this out. So what are we getting here? And don't get confused with this row. This is being printed out because in the backend script we actually have a search function being printed out. So this is printing the output of the search function. So this function is saying, give me the row with John Smith as author name. And next time this will not be executed. So back, what we want to do is select a row, and we get the row printed out there as a tuple. So that's great. So what's next? Well, next is we need to pass the ID of the selected tuple to the delete function of the backend script. We go to the delete selected button, command equals delete command. That's how I'm gonna call the script, and that should go here, def delete command. And what we have here is backend dot delete, and again the delete method gets as argument the ID. So we have a tuple called get selected row, so we need to return the selected tuple. So if we call the function now, get selected row, and we need the item with index 0 from a get selected row. So save the script, and we got an error at line 24. I don't have the colon here. Try out again. View, and let's try to delete the moon. Delete. And Python is saying that the get selected row is missing one required positional argument, and that's the event argument. And so Python is right, because here we have an event parameter, so we need to pass that as an argument. But here we are calling the function without any argument, so we're getting an error. On the other hand, we cannot remove this event because this function is also being executed by the bind method. So in that case, the hero of the day here would be a global variable. So you might already know that local variables, like the selected tuple, is a local variable because it's defined inside a function. So if you print this tuple outside the function, selected tuple, you will get an error because Python will say, oh sorry, I don't recognize this, this is an undefined object, because local variables make sense only inside the function. So in that case we can use global variables, and the way to create a global variable is by using the global keyword and then declaring the name of the variable that you want to create. So in that case, if you print out the selected tuple outside the function, you get the value of the selected tuple. And the value of the selected tuple in this case would be the tuple with the values of the row. So in that case, we don't need to return the selected tuple because we can simply point to the selected tuple variable in that case. And we need to fix our delete function here. So we want selected tuple, and we want the item with index 0 from the selected tuple. So let's execute again and view all, and let's delete the moon, delete selected, view all, and the moon is gone. So it seems to be working. Now I would also want to fill the entries with a selected tuple, or row if you like. So we need to use the insert function of the enter widget, and we could actually write those methods inside the getSelectedRow function, because you know, when the user clicks one of the rows, when they select one of the rows, we immediately want to fill those entries with values. And the first would be the title end, and we want to make sure the entry is empty. So delete 0 to end. Delete everything from the entry if there is something. And then E1 insert. So what we want to insert in the author entry, well, that would be the selected tuple with an index of 1. So the ID has an index of 0. The title has an index of 1. And this would be the same for the other entries as well. So we have E1, E2, E3, and E4. And then here we want to grab the author name. Here we want the year and the ISBN number in here. Great, so I hope this will work. It should work. So view all, select something, and insert method is missing one required argument. I think I forgot to put where I want to insert the new values. So we need end here, 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 and here. So let's see again, view all, and now it seems to be working. So trees and grass and bandstand and so on. And let me try to delete this. Delete, view all, and the entry is gone. Great, so now let's go ahead, without wasting any time, let's go ahead and implement the update function. So back to our backend script, the update function gets an ID and title, author, year, and ISBN. So unlike the delete function, which only got one item, this gets 5 items actually. So in the delete command function, we pass the selected tuple with an index of 0. Now the update function will be similar structure, but then we will have multiple arguments here. So we have ID, title, author, year, and ISBN. So selected tuple with an index of 1, selected tuple with an index of 2, selected tuple with an index of 3, and selected tuple with an index of 4. And then we need to add that function to the update button. So update command. All right, and I forgot to change this. Update command. This should work, so let's see. I've forgotten to pass the name of the parameter here. So command equals update command. Save and execute again. And view all. Let's try to update this row. So let's say 9. And you press update selected. And yet another error. Don't get scared about errors. The more errors you see, the more familiar you become with Python. It's important to focus on the error, so see what line you're getting the error and try to understand the type of the error and the message you're getting. So in this case, this says delete takes 1 positional argument, but 5 were given. Oh, we didn't execute the delete function here. We executed the update button, which gets an update command function. And you go to the update command. So the update command, backend delete. So that's why we are getting this error. The update command is actually executing the delete method of the backend script. So we want update instead of delete. And save the script and execute again. View all. I want to really update this number here. So 9. Update selected. View all. And it's not working. And in this case, we're not even getting an error here, so you may feel lost at the moment. So what you could do in this case is check what you are returning in your update command function. So you know that you can isolate problems by using print statements. So let's say you want to check what you are sending to the update function. I know the problem here, but just to show you the way you can troubleshoot things. So print out and execute this again. View all, get these grasslands, update selected, and you see that the tuple is being printed out as it is. So this number is not changing. Actually, I didn't change it, so let me change this again. Let's say 24 and update selected, and so you see that the number 24 is not being printed out here. So that means we are sending to the database this record again, so we're not sending the updated record. So why is that? If you have already found it from earlier when I wrote this function, that's very great. If you haven't, well, the reason is that we are sending to the update method the selected tuple, and the selected tuple is the one that the user has selected. So it's not the actual entries that the user is sending to the update command. So in that case, we actually want to send out these values, so the current values of the entries. So I'll copy this and paste it just here. Okay. And the first selected tuple is the ID, so we want to keep the ID of the selected row because the user is changing the other values, not the ID. And this looks fine. The bracket closes here. Save. So delete this one. Save. Execute again. View all. Go to this and let's say 3, update selected, view all, and 3 is there. Delete, view all, it goes away. You can add it again because you have it in your entries. Add entry, and it was added again, and you can see it here. So everything is working great. And we want to close this program, but the close button is not working at the moment, so let's go ahead and implement that as well. And that's very straightforward. You just go here and command equals to, so you want to destroy the window, right? So window dot destroy, that's it. Save the script and try it out. So these are working as usual. Close, and the window closes. And you may also want to put a title to your window. And use the WM title method of the window object. Title, let's say book store. And you should see that name in the title bar. So finally we are done with this program, and I know there might be things to improve, and I would welcome any suggestions from you so that we could improve the program. Programs have versions, so this is version 0, you could say. And I hope you found this very useful and learned a lot from this. So I'll talk to you later. Hi again. So we have this great program that works very well. And it consists of 3 files, so 2 Python files and 1 .db file, where the data is stored. And this is good, we can execute the scripts like this, so using Python, and we get the program displayed. But think of if you want to give your program to someone else, you can just tell them, oh, install Python, and you can execute the program by going to the terminal and invoking Python and the script. So that may get terribly difficult for users who are not experienced with programming. So in that case, you want to make a standalone executable program that you can just send to anyone, and they can just double click it and go ahead and insert data and retrieve data and so on. So in this lecture I'll show you how to make an executable file, and you will make that file whether you are on a Mac or Windows or Linux. So the code is the same. And there exists a great library to make standalone executables. That is the PyInstaller. So you can install PyInstaller using pip. And now it's terribly easy to make a standalone executable file out of your Python scripts. All you have to do is call PyInstaller and then point to your script. So in this case our main script is frontend.py. So that's the script that is holding all the code, and it also imports the backend script. So we want to point to that file. And if you leave it like this, you'll get a .exe file if you are on Windows, a .app file if you are on a Mac, and together with those files you'll also get a bunch of other files that are associated with your program. The benefit of that is that it gets easier to troubleshoot any errors that you may get. So you have lots of files, and then you can go to those files and find the error and so on. But if you want to be practical, you'd want to pass a parameter here called one file. So that will create a single executable file for you. And in this form you'll also get a terminal, a command line displayed on the background of your graphical user interface. So if you don't want that, you can specify another parameter called windowed. So like that, and execute. And you'll have to wait a while. And my executable was created. So if you were on a Mac, this would be a .app file. So mine is here the dist folder. So in this folder, I can look up here. So frontend.exe. If you execute that, you get the window. And as you see, you also got the books.db file generated. So by default, this only creates the executable file. Then when you execute the program for the first time, remember that we had a connect function in the backend script. So that function creates a database. So that's what this did. And if you view all now, you don't have any rows, so you don't have any data because this was created from scratch. So in case you want to have the existing database, you'd want to give to your user both the executable file and the existing database that you have. So for instance, let's say this doesn't exist, and I can go to my existing database, and if I put it here, so Python knows where to search for the database. Now if you view all, you'll get the data from the existing database. And we can make a quick test. Let's add the book, the great shirt, the tailor, and year 1913, and put a number there. Add the entry, and the entry is added to the database. And you can close the program, and that's it. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next lecture.